All right. Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Elena Roman. I hope I said your name correct.
Yeah.
Awesome. Elena and I, yeah, we've been in contact a little bit online. We both kind of went through this healing journey with long COVID and chronic illness. And I actually met Elena a year ago when I was traveling. She let me stay a night in her apartment, which was really cool. But yeah, Elena is doing a lot better now, and I wanted to invite her on here to talk about her experience with long COVID and what worked and what didn't work, and what can help others. So yeah, thanks for joining, Elena.
Thank you for having me. I was really excited when you reached out because I mean, I still like binge, I would say binge watch, but like binge hear your meditations. I kind of listen to them every day. So they've definitely been a constant throughout my healing journey. Um, so yeah, it's kind of fun now to be back like on the other side or been through it all and like
Yeah.
come out on the other side and yeah, chat with you today.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I love seeing it from my side as well when there's like people that I've been talking to, and then when they get to that state where I'm like, hey, now you're on the side, you want to share your healing story. It's always exciting to see, and yeah, hopefully inspirational for other people. So, I mean, let's take it back to the beginning. How did this start for you, right? When did you first start to get sick? Um, yeah, what happened, and then like from there, how bad did it get? But where did it start?
Yeah, I tried to keep it short, but it's definitely been
Mm,
a journey. It's been quite a long journey, but I think I was always like a really high functional person, like very active lifestyle. And then
mm,
I think 2021, I kind of struggled or had the first symptoms after the first COVID vaccine where I had like it was all centered around my heart. It was like heart palpitations and like shooting pains in my heart, etc. And that was the first time where I was like, this feels off. Like I remember every time I would walk up the stairs, like I would get these palpitations, and I was like, this is so weird. Like,
yeah,
I was like at my physical peak in terms of fitness back then.
right, yeah,
So yeah, I got that checked out and everyone was like, yeah, it's fine. Like some women especially get that after the vaccine. So I was like, not too worried to be honest. And then I think 4 or 5 months later, like it went away and I just kind of slowed down the exercise, etc. And then I was fine until like 2022, I think. The third COVID vaccine, I did have like nerve pain afterwards. But again, that kind of went away after 2 weeks. And back then, I didn't relate it to the vaccine directly. Like now looking backward, and reflecting, it definitely was like within the same time frame. So I think it was connected, but I didn't stress out about it too much. So I did have the nerve pain in my whole back for like 2 weeks. And
yeah,
then that went away. And 4 months later, I got my first COVID infection, and that completely like knocked me out. So that
right,
was April 2020, where I kind of started, yeah, being on this post-vac long COVID journey, whatever you would call it.
yeah.
And yeah, it went down like pretty steep from there.
Okay, so it was like first the vaccines and then the actual infection that like had the biggest impact on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So what did you like when you first, so let's talk about when you got the COVID infection. What did you explore first to try uh and what was like the, I would say like the worst period after that? Like how bad did the symptoms get, and then how did you try to navigate it? Like, I think we all initially go through like very traditional Western
Yeah.
approaches, and then see the limits because nobody really knew what was happening, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. That happened to me as well. So basically, it was a ramp up. Like, I felt like I never recovered from COVID, but then I was
Yeah.
still kind of functioning for like 4 to 6 weeks, like
Mm.
trying to work my job and like, trying to exercise and go out. And the symptoms just kind of kept adding on. And then I think 6 weeks later is when I could like kind of completely crashed. So I was like,
God.
yeah, pretty much bedbound at that point. I don't like really the labels.
Mm.
but I couldn't do much. I couldn't work. I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't even shower on some days, so it was pretty bad. And then I went down the traditional route, like you said. I don't know how it is in South Africa, but in Germany, it's like it's very it's very much great for like acute illnesses, but not
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much so like chronic symptoms or illnesses. So you don't really have one doctor who like kind of looks at you in a holistic way,
yeah,
ask you about your like stress levels or whatever. So I kind of went to each division like, and I had like 30 plus symptoms. So I probably went to like 15 or 20 like specialists to get everything checked out, like neurologist, pulmonologist, cardiologist, like the symptoms I have, or I had, like I went to that function of medicine and
yeah.
everyone was like, you're fine, you're fine. They actually did find a little bit of stuff. Like I did have a gastritis from the COVID infection. I was
Okay.
at the hospital, my blood sugar was kind of off. So they did find some things here and there, but like nothing major. And they were like, yeah, just go home and rest.
Yeah,
So I did that. But yeah, things kept getting worse. And then obviously, like my whole mindset kind of slipped at some point because
yeah,
I was just kind of, yeah, hopeless at some point because I thought there wasn't a way out. And then you start Googling and you just find all these like negative statements about long
yeah.
COVID. And then I found CFS and it was a bit of a rabbit hole from there.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. Like for me, it was exactly the same. Like the kind of that hopelessness sets in, and then turning to the internet for information to long
Mhm.
COVID and CFS doesn't really help that at all. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, how did you get through that kind of really hopeless phase? Like what started to shift things, and yeah, how did you get through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, I was kind of trying out different therapies and you know how it is like before every new treatment, you kind of get your hopes up and you
Yeah,
do kind of have some strength to like carry on. But at some point where I felt like I did try a lot of therapies and nothing helped, some ended up making me feel worse. I just hit that dead end and I really hit like rock bottom to a point where I was like looking at my family being like, I don't want to exist anymore. Like if
yeah,
I need to be in that state, um, I can't do this for the rest of my life, basically, right? So
yeah.
that's kind of when I hit rock bottom, but there was always a part of me who was like, no, like there's a way out. This like fighter mentality I think I've always had kind of came through.
Mm,
So I reached out in like in my friends group and also in my family like circle and asked if they knew anyone who was having kind of the same symptoms because I thought, I mean, it was 2022, so they were certainly like long COVID articles going
yeah,
around the news, etc. So I knew I wasn't the only one. So I was like, okay, let's try and find people who are going through the same and connect, and maybe they can help me, and kind of share a little bit of what worked and what didn't work. And I found this one guy. He he like had a post-vaccine syndrome as well, but like a year or a year and a half ahead of me. So he wasn't recovered when I first met him virtually, but he was definitely like very stable and kind of had found his path and like was pretty sure that there was a way out. And he really guided me. And I was very skeptical in the beginning,
mm.
because he basically like kind of meditated himself out of this whole thing. And I was like, I don't know, this sounds very woohoo to me. Like back then, I
Yeah,
had nothing to do with meditation. I was very much go, 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 like always kind of distracting myself. Um, I mean, I basically did everything to not sit with myself back then.
right.
So, yeah, I was very skeptical, but kind of we kept in touch. And I think what made him so credible was that we were both kind of working the same jobs. We were living in the same city. We were both like, he was also this like high performing overachiever kind of type,
Mm,
and not this like yogi woohoo
right, right.
guy. So I think that was helpful for me to kind of keep talking to him and being like, no, he's not crazy. He's just like,
Yeah.
he's very much like you. He just has found this like path. And yeah, that's kind of when my mind started shifting from like, I have something that can't be cured to like something that's actually where there is a way out. And doctors may not know what that path looks like, but there's
Yeah.
certainly people who have been like through it themselves and they have come out. And then I kind of started from there on like looking for these recovery stories. And I found like your channel and different other channels like Raylan Eagles. And that's really when things started to switch and
Yeah.
look a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very common. Like for me, it was exactly the same, where it was like shifting from, and I'm glad you mentioned like how hopeless things do get, because I think um, it's good for people to know that kind of people like us that have gotten through it do go through those phases as well, where you're like, I really actually don't want to exist anymore if this is what it's going to be like for the rest of my life. But I love what you said, because I've looked back myself as well, and I'm like, but there was something kind of like you said, that like fighter, something inside that was like, even through those phases, it was still looking, for something, right? And then that's why I love, yeah, people like Raylan Eagle, because that was the same for me. It was like finding um relatable recovery stories. I think that's key, because a lot of the stuff does kind of push our present beliefs and on what's possible with healing. I like that you mentioned that, because yeah, I think we can often maybe see somebody that's now into meditation and think that they were always like that. Whereas for me, it was exactly the same. Like I was also always this like go, 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 um, high performance. And I've had people ask me like, oh, were you like a meditation teacher before you got COVID? I was like, absolutely
Yeah.
not.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny. I was like the opposite, and I do remember certain people, like my parents, kind of point out to me a couple years back, like maybe 5 years back, to like slow down a little bit more. And
right.
I remember my boss kind of telling me to like do more yoga and stuff. So I think people around me were kind of like um giving me those signals, but I was
Yeah.
so resistant to it. I was like, no, I'm
Yeah.
fine. Like I don't need this stuff. But yeah, I'm like now I'm the biggest fan of meditation. So
Yeah.
it's funny sometimes how life unfolds.
It's crazy, like, and it's so true, because it really has to come from like yourself. I see this even with other people, friends and family, and you can see they could probably benefit from it. But I know, same as you, that like you don't really listen to it until it's your body that's telling you it, as opposed to somebody externally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It really has to come from within for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All right. So then once you started, like, what was the techniques that you found was working the best for you? So once you started to understand, okay, I can heal. Like I know when that phase starts to shift, there's probably still a lot of doubt for a lot of us,
Hmm.
but you're realizing that there's a possibility. It's like, okay, I'm not doomed. But it's still a lot of work from there, right? You got to kind of deal with everything going on inside, and the ups and downs of making progress and then losing it. So yeah, how did that phase go for you, and what were the techniques that were really helping the most?
Yeah, I feel like the first technique was getting more like educated around
Mm.
my body and like how all of these mechanisms help. Like I'm a person who needs to understand like why meditation would help or like
Yeah,
so I started learning like I mean basically I was very much in this analytical phase, right? Where I
yeah,
was like not really accepting the state I was in, like still being very resistant. And I started like binge watching Raylan Hagel's channels and I tried to like find and look for patterns of like, is there one thing that everyone did that
mm,
helped them recover? And obviously diet was something. So I was still kind of going on off track of that whole like nervous system route.
yeah,
But I did, for me, it stood out that nervous system played a huge role within this whole thing. But back then, I didn't really know what the nervous system was. So
yeah,
it's just funny now since it's such a huge part of my life. But
yeah,
so I think the first step was to kind of educate myself, like in the realm of my capacity. I listened to podcasts, like I kind of read about Joe Dispenza and I read his
Mm.
books and I tried to understand like more about epigenetics and how our mindset and like our thoughts kind of up and down regulate our genes and like
Yeah.
how we can help our nervous system to go into that like parasympathetic state more often. I read a whole lot and learned a whole lot about trauma and
Yeah.
how that can like present itself as yeah as a dysregulated state in the nervous system. So alongside that, I was obviously also kind of introduced to the concept of pacing, where I was like
Mm.
trying little by little to like increase activity, but it was very rough. Like there was a lot of doubts because I would literally like go on a walk for like 5 minutes and I would kind of be in bed for like a week. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what was better than before was my whole mindset around the symptoms. I didn't no longer thought I was like dying or I had to call 911
Yeah.
and whenever like things got really intense and symptoms flared up, but it was still like very much of a bumpy ride and I was still looking a lot for like external things, like still in a way distracting myself,
Yeah.
trying to get more knowledge around it. And some part of me always thought like you also have to talk to this person and know this and etc. While I think looking backward, maybe things would have sped up a little bit more if I would have started like kind of sitting my more with myself back then, but
Right.
I was
Yeah.
still kind of needing to get that credibility around that whole approach, like
Yeah.
that whole mind body approach to work.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the importance of like we do need that however our approach to understanding things is, and I think for a lot of people it is coming from an analytical intellectual space. It's like that really needs to be solidified first, I think, before we're going to be able to use these practices uh like and truly use them, you know. It's funny,
Hmm.
like from my space I often just try to share the practical stuff with people, but if I look back at my own path, it's the same as you, like this big phase of understanding the nervous system first, you know, like really um yeah, getting that into your system that, oh, okay, this is why this would work. And then looking back, like you said, it can, I think we'll kind of still have that tendency to want to find the intellectual way out. So we eventually do have to shift from like the understanding and the searching for the answers to kind of going into direct experience. But it is an important phase because I think otherwise, yeah, people hear it and it just does sound like that's not going to fix my physical symptoms, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It definitely had to kind of sink in and that took
yeah,
a while.
yeah,
But I think that also kind of helped me to understand that I'm a very analytical person and that I've
yeah,
always been kind of a chronic overthinker, which then again helped me to better understand why my body would constantly go into that stressed mode, right? Because I was physically resting, but my
yeah,
body would still go into like freeze or fight or flight. So I think that's kind of also when I found your channel and we started like chatting around all that clutter that's in your mind.
yeah,
And I think up until that point in my life, I never thought about thoughts. Like,
right.
I mean, obviously I knew we were having thoughts, but um yeah, I don't know. I wasn't even aware of that possibility to kind of look at your thoughts from like a
Yeah,
made up perspective and not take them for what they are. Um, and yeah, I think that's kind of when I noticed that I need to find a way to get out of my head, if that makes
mm,
sense,
yeah,
and understand why I've always been in my head basically my entire life, which I think is just a coping mechanism for not feeling emotions or like not being in
yeah,
your body. So I think that's kind of when I started really like go, yeah, getting into meditation and also into body work
yeah,
through like somatic tracking or somatic experiencing. And I think that's kind of when things really shifted from like, okay, I don't have an answer to I kind of understand how I can get out of this, but
yeah,
then I really started implementing things and I kind of stopped looking for outside answers, but I really kind of started, I feel like the inner work and really
Yeah.
sat down with myself and um yeah, then a lot of things came up.
As it tends to happen the first time we actually stop. I
Yeah.
like what you mentioned about the thoughts though, because that is like if we talk about like awakening and stuff, like this shift in our relationship with our minds and like our identities, the first thing we generally find is that our whole lives we kind of exactly the way you described it, like we're thinking 24/7, but we don't realize that there's another relationship to have with thought as something that's kind of passing through our experience as opposed to um, being the thoughts as they arise, like and that's so triggering for the nervous system as well, I think, because then a stress-based thought arises and then we are that thought as soon as it's there. So I think that
Hmm.
that first shift is like the key one to realize, oh, my thoughts are actually something in my experience. But I think what a lot of people find is it can also be a little overwhelming at first when we realize how much the mind thinks, right? How much of overthinkers we all are. Obviously, some we all have different ways that we're wired. But I remember for myself, like after I first started meditating for a while, it can get quite frustrating when you realize like how much is happening in the mind. Um, but then also you mentioned the importance of going into the body. So how did you find that process? What kind of worked for you, the more somatic stuff? Because I think that's key. Is this is also what I love to share is that um, the more that you can actually just sit, like you said, you sit and then all these things come up. The more you can be with the physical experience of it. One, you want to be able to let the thoughts go, but the key is really the sensations.
Yeah. Yeah, it it took a while for me to really grasp that because I think I like let me think about this, but it was pretty early on, I would say, after like 5, 6 months that I understood and really believed that the root cause was the nervous system and
Yeah.
not like any issues with my organs whatsoever. But it took me a while to understand that the language of the nervous system is emotions and not
Mm,
like the German language. Like I couldn't just tell myself I'm safe and I'm
right.
okay on an intellectual level because
Yeah.
if I didn't truly feel it, like my nervous system wouldn't kind of acknowledge that I'm actually safe.
Yeah.
So the way I started or I came up with like bottom up work or like um, bodily work was actually through Alan Gordon. I don't know if you know him. It's like
No.
this, it's a pain psychologist from the Pain Psychology Center in LA. And
Okay.
he wrote a book called The Way Out, where he basically, I mean, he treats a lot of people with like chronic pain and chronic illness. And he basically introduced this whole concept of like feeling secure for me on like an
Right.
emotional level. So, and he introduced me to somatic tracking, which is basically, for everyone who doesn't know it, a tool or like a practice where you sit down and you feel into your bodily sensations without judging them. So basically, without having any negative judgmental thoughts to it, and also where you kind of accept them as they are, you explore
Yeah.
them out of curiosity, you kind of befriend yourself with your sensations and you let go of that resistance, right? And that was really hard in the beginning, but things started to shift so much when I introduced um that exercise basically. And then I got really curious around like the whole body and like kind of the nervous system from like a bottom up perspective. So I kind of dig deeper and I read this like one book called Anxiety RX, um, which is a guy who basically struggled with like depression and chronic symptoms his whole life. And he literally tried like every treatment. I think at some point he even tried like psychedelics. Um, and he found out that the alarm was in his body. um,
Mm.
through trauma that got stuck in the nervous system. And that was so interesting to me. That really kind of convinced me that it's, yeah, my mind does play a role, but it's also my body that really needs to feel safe.
Yeah.
Um, and then I started understanding why I have been a chronic overthinker my whole life, why I started from a very early age on just being in my head because I think the emotions were so overwhelming at that
Mm.
time. And I just kind of fled into my head. And then, I mean, overthinking does give you a false sense of security, I would say, where you
Yeah.
like, you kind of could catastrophize, you like anticipate future worst case scenarios,
Yeah.
which then, if they don't come true, your brain is like, yay, like they actually didn't happen because I
Right.
anticipated them, right? So
No,
it's
it's
almost
like,
like
yeah,
a
it's kind of reinforcing that type of thinking. Yeah.
exactly. I almost feel like it's like an addiction.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
as soon
Yeah.
as I started kind of realizing that, I was like, okay, I just need to get access to my emotions and start teaching my body and my brain that being in my body and being with my emotions is safe. And
Yeah.
it's so funny because I'm still an analytical person, but I'm way less of a overthinker
Yeah.
nowadays because I just started like I just switched up this pattern from just being in my head all the time to being more in my body and just
Yeah.
being okay with whatever is here.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's so cool for me to hear like the different ways we get to the same kind of spaces. Like for me, it was exactly the same shift that had to happen was from living in the head chronically to opening up to this field of body sensations. Um, and for me, a lot of the uh, understanding of that came through Angelo DeLullo's teaching. I know we've spoken a little bit about him before, and it's cool to see how you came to the same things through like more of people talking about anxiety and like these kind of things. But it led to the exact same thing. Like this is what Angelo helped me understand was the same thing of how we use thoughts basically as a coping mechanism to get away from what we learn is um, like things that we shouldn't be feeling. And, we pick it up empathically from other people. It's like, don't feel shame, don't feel guilt, don't feel this. Like, um, and sometimes, if we look at it like at a young age, sometimes it's adaptive, it's important. It's like we learn um, in our environments. Like this was something that I learned is like, growing up in schools and all of that, there's times when you feel like you do have to hide a certain emotion because it would be unsafe for you to display that emotion there. But then the problem is it gets like hardwired, and as you said as well, we get addicted to those thought loops. I think anybody that starts to do this kind of mind body stuff with meditation, you can see how addictive thinking actually is, where it's like it's so difficult to not just hop on the thought train about the future or the past.
For sure.
Yeah, but even for anybody that's kind of very much an overthinker or um, you feel very distant from your body, there's always like finding what resonates with you, I think is what is key. Like for you, it was finding these um, teachers that's what spoke to you, right? Like maybe I could say, hey, this was the guy that spoke to me, but maybe it's not going to land the same for you as it will for somebody else, or whatever. So I think that's really important as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we talked about Angelo Di Lullo, and I read his book as well, but um, I think I just needed different sources. And also,
Yeah.
again, I needed that medical community that
Yeah.
convinced me even more, I think. And I guess that's different for everyone. And um, I mean, Kyle, you probably remember how confused I was once I started doing this work. I was like, I ended up like over analyzing constantly, like
Yeah.
reaching out to you, asking all those questions and being like, I'm so confused. Like, I don't really know what's going on. And, um, it's not like I'm in this meditative state all the time now. It's like I don't
Yeah.
have any overthinking going on. I still very much fall back into those patterns. It's funny how like it's so hard to get this hard wiring out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I arrived at this point where I have like the tools and this awareness of like how to deal with it, which
Yeah.
is very different from back then.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it's so cool to like chat with you now because I do remember it, like when you were so like or like specifically I
I'm so
remember
stuck.
and specifically around like how to feel into the body. I remember talking a lot about that, when it was like to feel an emotion. And then I think when you're so up in the mind, it's like we think about how to feel an emotion rather than actually feeling it. Or there's also like, I think this is such a common one for a lot of people is there's a lot of uh, thoughts that say it's unsafe to feel the emotions, right? Where we're like, don't go into the physical. That's not safe. And so many
And
people,
that was a huge thing for me
yeah,
because in the very beginning of the journey, I mean, I had literally no capacity. Like I couldn't
yeah,
even go shower on certain days. So that's where when my emotions were like the most intense.
yeah,
Like I've never experienced such intense emotions before. But every time I started like crying or, giving those emotions some room, I would literally crash.
yeah.
So in my mind, it was very unsafe to
Right,
even
right.
just feel emotion. So I had to kind of introduce that approach. I feel like later on,
Mm,
when I did have more capacity, and also when I understood that I need to kind of teach my brain that it's safe to access my emotions and like do it in a bit smaller portions
yeah,
where it's like not overwhelming the nervous system. And that took quite a while until I could really dig in because I
yeah, yeah.
was no longer scared of like feeling whatever's there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point because if we keep on feeling the emotions but have such a strong reaction, we're going to be reinforcing it that it's unsafe to feel those emotions. So I think it's key to, yeah, start to do it in more bite-sized chunks so that and I guess it's difficult because we can feel like when the emotions are so intense, like how do I only experience it in a bite-sized chunk? Like when we're in this difficult phase. And I think sometimes it's unavoidable. Like if you're in like a really difficult state, you're going to be feeling very intense emotions. But yeah, I think the point of um, teaching your body that it is safe to feel these emotions, but yeah, in ways that are manageable. I mean, do you have any advice for other people of how to go about that to do it in more of a manageable way than a overwhelming way?
Yeah, I think what was key for me was to kind of separate the emotion from the narrative in my mind because I feel
Mm,
like that's what intensified the emotion, kind of kept me being there for longer. So
yeah,
I would literally like, I mean, first of all, it took me a long time to even access my emotions. Like
yeah,
I would need to like use music or like movies or some sort of
mm,
tool to even get access to my emotions because I've been kind of suppressing emotions for the past couple of years.
yeah,
So that was like the first step. And then I started trying to focus on feeling safe with whatever I was feeling, but also whenever I realized that I would go back up in my head and kind of build a narrative around the
yeah,
emotion, like a story of why I was feeling the way I was, and like kind of also going into that victim mentality
mm,
sometimes of being like, oh, I'm feeling so sad because this person was so mean to me or whatever.
yeah,
I think that's when I kind of re-traumatized myself and kind of kept being stuck, and that's what really intensified the whole thing that my nervous system couldn't handle.
mm,
But when I started kind of separating the narrative, and again, every time I went up into my head, I really focused on no, like I don't need to label the emotion I'm feeling. I don't need to come up with a story why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I'm just focusing on feeling the emotion and feeling
yeah,
safe with it. That really helped. And I think in that way, you also, it's easier to kind of have those bites, like the
yeah,
smaller bites of feeling, because after like 10 minutes, you're kind of like, it's easier to be done feeling than
yeah,
when you kind of start this like whole narrative in your
Yeah.
mind where you kind of go backwards like through your entire biography,
Yeah.
and think about why you feel the way you do.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest things with doing the emotion work is I totally agree that the what makes it so intense is our addiction to the narrative. Um, so to be able to, this is what I remember I learned that from the emotions chapter in Angelo's book, which I like to recommend to people because it just simplified things so much for me, where it was like you don't need to, like you said, you don't need to label it. You don't need to understand like who triggered it and this and that, but just uh, separate the narrative, right? And that's obviously why like gaining some sort of awareness through meditation is so helpful because we're generally up in that narrative without even realizing it. But over time, everybody can kind of get better and better at that as we both experienced. But yeah, it's just become so much simpler. And like you said, the processing actually happens so much more effectively when we do it on the so like that's the beautiful part of the work is it's simple, right? It's like um it's just feeling into the sensations. But it's difficult, like it's simple, but it's difficult because there's so much habit to uh
Mhm.
going into the story, right? And wanting to
Yeah,
make
it's
a
so
story
easy
out
from
of it.
like a theoretical perspective, but then
Yeah.
when you're actually doing it, it's quite challenging in a way, even though
Yeah.
it's so simple. But I think one thing that also made things a lot easier was like compassion. And I remember that's
Mm,
something, a concept that I didn't really know. I was always like very hard on myself, and I
yeah.
still am sometimes. So this is a good reminder for me as well. But you introduced, it was just so funny to like see the the similarities of the approach from both you and then also this other guy I found early on, or like even early on in my
Yeah.
journey. And you were both speaking a lot on like compassion and just kind of holding space for yourself and like kind of giving yourself a hug. And so I would
Mm,
start ending up like the feelings or like sitting with my emotions, then towards the end also doing some type of like compassionate act, like a
yeah.
meditation, or also I would start doing those imaginations where you kind of meet your inner child and then you like
Mm,
hug it, or you just kind of reparent yourself in a
yeah.
way. So I think that was also a very important concept for my brain to realize that feeling emotions is actually safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. The compassion is so it's so powerful and helpful because I think yeah, it also increases our capacity of what we're able to feel as opposed to when we're doing it from too much of a you have to get this right, you have to heal yourself, you have to fix yourself. When it's more just like a yeah, I'm actually holding space for all of these parts of myself that have been chronically repressed, and to understand. And I
Mhm.
like that one about um yeah, the inner child work because I think so many people struggle to find compassion for their current version of themselves because we've all learned to be so, like hard and uptight and all of that. Um, but if we think, and this was the same for me, like I had zero compassion for myself initially on this path until I started. I got it from a physio that I was working with at the time. She was like, you just sound like you need a big hug, and then. And then she started to give me some advice on compassion practices. And I agree. For me, the easiest was like um, yeah, to think back to the innocent like version of yourself that just kind of needs, like you said, some reparenting. It's like the child that was whatever had this happen to them and then learned to react in that kind of way was just doing the best that they could. I think that's a nice access point to compassion is like you're doing the best that you can, and you always have been, but we get stuck in whatever all of our experiences. So yeah, and then from there, I think once we get a taste of it, like anything, it gets more accessible. So like whichever way we can uh, start to access compassion via, then it gets easier. I would say, yeah.
It does. It does until you're back to life, I feel like, and then it gets
Yeah.
harder again. I think that's
Yeah.
also something so interesting about this healing journey. It's like in the beginning, I did have so much time. Obviously, I mean, I had nothing but time,
Yeah.
which helped me to kind of do all of this work and really dig deep. But then obviously you're still like in this phase of kind of managing your symptoms, and then
Yeah.
as your sensations become less intense, you kind of are able, or you have more capacity to kind of do this inner work.
Yeah.
But then also you have to find a way to reintegrate back into life, right? And that's where
Yeah.
the real triggers happen. So this is
Yeah,
where you're like
exactly.
constantly triggered by whatever.
Yeah.
But then you're kind of back in this trot of like, or this hamster wheel of like
Yeah.
doing things and like working. And so then it became really challenging. And to this point, it really is to give myself like this room and this space of
Yeah.
checking in with my body and checking in with my emotions. So yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because let's dive more into that, I think, because I think that is the integration phase is like it was the same for me. Like you're in this phase where you have nothing but time to work on your healing and go deep within. Um, and then you increase your capacity and then it's like, okay, cool, I can start to do things again. And but it's exactly like you said, and I noticed this with myself as well, is it's like you start to get you have to find the balance, and you maybe one time you go a little bit too much to this side, a little bit too much to that side. But yeah, how have you found that process of kind of starting to do more again in the world, and now you like we can talk a little bit at the end what you're up to nowadays, but getting back into work, getting back into exercise, um, like the benefits of it and also the challenges that come with that. Like, yeah, how's that been?
Yeah, so I feel like I I kind of went from this one extreme to the other, like you just
Right,
mentioned. So I went back into work, and I started obviously feeling a lot better, but then also very much finding myself not having time or making room and time to sit with myself and like I don't know, deep down I had a my intuition was kind of telling me that there was still so much stuff
right, yeah,
in terms of emotions that I haven't processed. So at some point I was like, okay, I need to get out of my daily doing and really
mm,
give myself a break to kind of do some more deeper work. So I actually went and took a break earlier this year, I think for like 5 weeks, where I did trauma therapy, but also, yeah, really just a lot of IFS work, so inner parts work, together with therapists. And it was very intense, lots of
right,
emotions. So it was like the complete opposite. And
yeah,
then I was done with that and I went back into the other extreme where it's like, okay, I need a break from all this work.
yeah,
Like I'm so fed up because I do have a tendency to kind of fall into that victim mentality, but also into
mm,
that there's so much stuff that happened and like is there ever gonna way is there ever gonna be like a time where I don't feel that like emotional or sensitive or where I don't get dysregulated easily because I've
mm,
always been a very dysregulated person. Like it's yes, COVID was like the final straw, but even looking back as a child, I was very fearful. I couldn't really sleep well. Like I was
mm,
thinking all the time and so I kind of at the end of these like 5 I need a break from just healing. Like I need to go
yeah,
back to life and not just live my life and not focus too much on like what has happened in the past or like what more healing work I need to do. I was kind of burned out from like healing, I felt
yeah,
like. So again, I went into the other extreme where I was like hamster wheel, working, 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 go, go, go. Obviously, I would always like make sure I did sleep enough. I would I would always like do my meditations at night and like lay on my acupuncture mattress. I would still take cold showers. So I was obviously more aware, or am more aware of like um checking in with my body throughout the day and like kind of learning how to regulate myself.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess now, as of recent, I found a better balance of like living a normal life again, which does
Yeah.
become really full and like having all these expectations um, from everyone else, but also being aware of like when it's too much, but also being aware of when I just need time to sit with myself.
Yeah.
But it's still like it's a constant battle. It's
Yeah.
not like I have found the perfect balance. Like I'm still, yeah, working on that, I would say.
I totally agree. It's like the learning doesn't stop. In fact, it gets more um yeah, like for me, I found it like and I feel like that process that you described, it's very much exactly how it goes, like that shifting between um intense healing and then just like taking a break. Like it's been similar for me. It was like meditation retreats, like I would basically once I healed and I felt like cool, I can do anything again, then I just dived like you into the opposite extreme of cool, I'm done with healing. I'm just gonna live my life
Mhm.
now. And then I started to notice that there wasn't that like distractions started to build up again and my body like I needed that space. So I went on a meditation retreat. And I feel like the difference is um now you have like we have a much better intuition and feeling with the body when it's time to switch from one to the other. And I think over time we start to like get more of a balanced approach. But I think that kind of natural pendulum swing um, is like I don't think it's possible to avoid that phase, where we're going to naturally
Yeah,
go from one side to the other. But I think the difference is like having been through that total healing phase where we were disconnected from the rest of the world, we um, you get you learn those kind of healing concepts and you get into that space, whereas now you know when you need to readjust in the external world, whether it's from one side to the other. And
yeah.
like you said earlier, like this is also where so much of the um deeper work happens, because now all of your uh triggers are coming up around like other people and around like all these like more dynamic conflicting scenarios. It's like life now becomes the real teacher. It's like you had
Hmm.
the training boot camp phase where it's like, okay, cool, you're going to learn all of um the ways to handle stress and work with your nervous system. Cool, we finished that phase, and now it's like, okay, now level two is like, can you do that in a more dynamic environment? And
Hmm.
and it's going to have its
Yeah.
own challenges, and we'll still have like, for me, I've also found it when it's like, okay, I need to reassess and come back to, you know, what's happening here. But at least we know how to navigate it. Then I would say,
Yeah, I think it's a constant learning process, and I feel
yeah,
like this process might never end, and maybe that's a
yeah,
limiting thought I have. I don't know, but it's like it's almost like yes, I am recovered from long COVID, but the emotional aspect is just a lifelong journey, I feel like. And it's
yeah,
hard, like, to find that balance that you just described, living in this world where you have all these people around you that are constantly distracting, that are not aware
mm,
of the concepts we just spoke about, that yeah, I mean, it's like I feel like you always have to actively make this decision to
mm,
not do what everyone else is doing, which
yeah,
is challenging, obviously, because sometimes distracting is just the easy way out, right? It's more
yeah,
comfortable sometimes than to kind of sit with like your anxiety or with your thoughts or with weird like sensations within your body. But like you said, I think the difference now to like back then is we do have a tool set, we do have the awareness, um, we know how to do the work. It's a
yeah,
matter of like prioritizing yourself and choosing to do it.
yeah, exactly. And for me, it's become like like I agree. I think it is a lifelong learning process, but like it gets like I've heard Angelo speak about this as well, which was quite cool, where it like just gets um I think the suffering aspects of it gets less and less and less, but the um yeah, like it then becomes more of like how to interact with others in the most kind of authentic way.
Hmm.
Because for me, what is nice nowadays is it's like it almost becomes enjoyable to not distract, but I had to go through enough of these phases of, like you said, try like because what happened with me is like you get sucked in, like you said, being with other people that distract, you kind of get sucked into that way of living again, where I'm just going to live like everybody else. And then I had to happen enough times where I was like, it's just not worth it in that sense.
Yeah.
So, and
And I feel
then,
like I'm not quite there. Like
yeah,
I'm naturally drawn to those practices.
yeah,
Like I do have my intuition being like, it's time to meditate, or it's time to like call it a day, or it's time to um not meet anyone like at the weekend and just
yeah,
be with yourself. But I still also find myself like being anxious for a day or two and like kind of resisting to feel into it and kind of
yeah,
distracting until I things ramp up and I'm like, dude, you're like doing literally the same thing. Like you should really know better. And then I turn to
yeah,
whatever practice. But yeah, it's not like it's perfect all the time. I
yeah,
think that's important to mention for everyone being on this journey. It's like it's not that I feel like it's not that you reach this like Buddha state at some point where
yeah.
like life is easy all the time and like you don't have any triggers and you don't react to it. I think like you said, it just you suffer less because it becomes easier and easier.
Yeah.
And just it's a more dynamic thing and process, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we get like better at seeing those patterns earlier and earlier. I think that's the key is it's like those patterns keep coming back and then and I think this is where compassion is so key because exactly how you described it, where you get to that space where it's like, why am I doing this again? Like I know there's another way, but it's like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of habit and it's like you said earlier, it's very I mean, the environments we find ourselves in, it's very understandable that we get pulled into those habits when it's like everywhere around you. So I think that compassion is so helpful where it's like, okay, sure, this maybe wasn't like my best way to deal with something, but like we're working through it. Like you get better each time. Like that's what I've noticed with myself is like maybe new patterns come up from different situations. That's what I found as well is like some of the old patterns disappear and then a new relationship or a new kind of conflict here in life and it's like whoa, there's a whole new set of things that I didn't realize, but it just, yeah, I guess you become more and more aware of it and then like it'll kind of slowly fades away. um but yeah, what are you doing now in the, because I mean your Instagram I know is really helpful for a lot of people in Germany. So yeah, what are you doing now in the healing space and yeah, what's happening for you?
Yeah, I started realizing that I'm very blessed to know the English language on
Yeah,
this path. Like honestly, I don't know where I would be if I didn't know English because literally every source, every person that helped me on this journey was English speaking. I barely found anyone in the German space.
yeah,
Um, so I started creating an Instagram account around long COVID, post-vaccine, CFS, chronic illness in general, where I just started posting and like talking about what has helped me, sharing my journey. And then people kind of started reaching out, asking for help if I could coach them along the way. And I was like, why not? Like, I'll just try out. Obviously, I'm not like a psychologist, I'm not like a
yeah.
certified therapist, but I feel like just being through the experience myself is always like the best certification you can get,
Yeah,
even if
and
it's a tough, it's a
oftentimes
tough
it's
one.
more helpful than somebody that's really qualified but hasn't been through the same experiences. There's not like that same relatable side to it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I've been doing that, kind of slowly building that up. And it's so cool to see. It's like this community of German people. Like we do group coachings together, which I lead. I do one-on-one coachings. I do it as a side hustle, so my Fridays are basically dedicated to helping others. And then Monday through Thursday, I work my previous job, um, which is interesting because I
Mm,
do think that the job was part of me, like becoming dysregulated, but I truly wanted to go back to that environment to deal with all the triggers, deal with the
yeah,
stress, and learn how to react in a different way. So I'm still doing that. And yeah, other than that, I'm living a normal life. I was just t telling Kyle, I'm like, I traveled this week. I'm flying out to Madrid on Sunday, so I'm not really limited in a way in what I
yeah,
can do. I don't do like intense exercising yet, like I used to do. But I do exercise like a average person, I would say.
yeah,
Um, I just, yeah, it was a very like extreme, um, like a very extreme when it came to sports before long COVID. So I'm not
yeah,
there yet. But I don't know. I think it's just deconditioning and like I need to slowly
yeah.
build up my muscles and my endurance. But yeah, life is pretty good again. Like I can do a lot of
Awesome.
things.
Yeah,
But it's also challenging in a way. It's like there's so much gratitude for just simple things, but then there's also a lot of challenges once you do have this whole new perspective on
yeah,
like thoughts, emotions, etc. Like in a work and not always like constantly blaming external people like I used to for feeling the way I feel, but
yeah,
understanding that it's my reaction to the world and to like external triggers and stimulus. So,
yeah,
like I said, it's not always like easy and rainbows and sunshines. It's still challenging, but obviously in a different way than like
yeah.
dealing with chronic symptoms 24/7 and like not being able to get out of bed.
Yeah, it's true. I totally agree. Like the thing is you can't bullshit yourself in the way that you used to anymore. And that's what's really
Hmm.
challenging is like you can't purposefully go unconscious and say like I don't like, like you said, blame it on somebody else. The tendency, like you can still see the tendencies to want to do that, but you can't like purposefully bullshit yourself and put it because you know that it's like your own shit that you have to feel with. And that aspect of it can be very frustrating sometimes, even where it's
Hmm.
like, shit, I got to, you can't run from anything anymore. It's like right there
Yeah,
in your
exactly.
face. So yeah, that's very true. Um, but yeah, my experience with the exercise as well is I think one aspect of it is I agree. For me, it was like building up my endurance again, and then I did get into very high intensity exercise. What was funny though is recently, um, then I developed that identity again of like, oh, I can do high intensity exercise all the time whenever I want. But I went traveling and I got pretty unfit. And then I came back and just tried to go straight back into like my high intensity
Mm-hmm.
exercise. And I was like, that's probably not healthy for my nervous system. And it wasn't like I could feel it. So I think that approach of like building up endurance, which is what I did the first time, but then I came back and I was like, oh, I'm fine. I can do whatever. Um, one other aspect I would
Yeah, and
say,
I mean,
yeah,
like I want to be completely honest, like there's still fear around high intensity exercise for me.
yeah,
Like it's still it's not very much on a like physical level, but on a mental level where I still need to kind of process everything that has happened. Sometimes I'm
yeah,
like it's on the one hand so surreal, like to have got like gone through all of this, but then there's still also obviously thought patterns from this whole experience that creep up. And I remember like the initial crash I had like after I got COVID was from going on a very long and intense bike ride. Like
right,
I started having symptoms. I went on like a 120 kilometer, like 5 hour bike ride, high intensity. And that's kind of when I crashed. And I mean, from a rational level, I know that that wasn't like the exercise wasn't the reason I
Mm,
crashed, but obviously there was still some type of trauma or like
yeah.
experience from that. So yeah, I'm just through this process, like I'm just giving myself grace and like
Yeah.
not rush things. Like I no longer identify as someone who's very fit and like athletic all the time. I do feel some like I do have times where I feel really sad because I used to be this like
Mm,
person who can climb mountains and like do whatever she wants, like in terms of athletics. And that's not no longer the case. But on the other side, I'm like, I no longer identify like being able to run all the time or like being very fit and like
yeah.
very athletic. So, but yeah, it's still, things I need to work through.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, there's a lot of that letting go of old identities, which generally has a lot of sadness like attached to it. But I
Yeah, I
think
remember your video on letting go. I think it's called Letting Go, and I used to listen to it all the time and like I mean I would end up crying all the time.
yeah,
It was so beautiful in a way.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's such a big part of the process, like the letting go aspect. Um, I think the other thing I would say about high intensity exercise, because I was the same, like before I got ill, it was like such a huge part of my personality. Whereas now realizing that a part of that was also kind of like you said early on, a big component of a coping mechanism to not to keep running away from what's happening in the body
Hmm.
24/7, where it
Yeah.
was like, I have to stay busy, I have to stay active, I have to keep kind of hold of this identity and kind of keep working on that and all of that. So um yeah, I mean, I would say from my experience, one can get back to high intensity exercise, but at the same time, the motivation for it is definitely not the same as it was before. And I can look back and see how it was a bit of a uh, like a coping and an avoidance
Hmm.
mechanism
Same
in
here.
itself. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I would literally like run myself tired
Yeah.
to just get this anxiety out of my body
Yeah.
instead of just sitting with it. Yeah, it's funny nowadays.
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's funny finding that balance because on the other side of it, I've also noticed phases where I've been exercising less, and it is a good way to get that some of that anxiety out of the body as well. Where it's like
hmm.
if I feel like I don't feel good if I don't exercise a lot, I'll just start to feel like really anxious, and then I get out. And even if it's just going for like a long ass walk, it's like
Walk. Yeah.
yeah, just the body needs to
Yeah.
move as well. So it's like that both sides of it. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And it just really kind of like I got really good at understanding like what my nervous system needs. Like sometimes it's
Mm,
really just craving rest, and then other times it's like shaking and like jumping around and like
yeah.
jumping on my bike and just going for a long walk or like go on my spinning bike and exercise. It really depends, but it's so different than to like do it from this perspective of how can I feel the best, like how do I
Mm,
feel the best version, like or become the best version of myself and not
yeah.
from that past perspective of like I need to exercise to like look good or
Yeah.
to become fit or to, be fitter than others or to run away from anything.
Yeah.
It's just so different like now.
Yeah. I can totally relate. It's that like more intuitive learning what's actually healthy, what and it's that like better self relationship with the body that's not being uh like kind of misdirected with all of this trauma and stuff where it's like okay this is what's best for me but there's actually a lot that's making me choose otherwise because of what's stored in the system or
Yeah, for
whatnot.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you to kind of wrap this up, what would your uh number one or couple like recommendation be for somebody um who's still working through this? Like, yeah, what would you feel is like just a short piece of advice or a recommendation that you feel called to share with others?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, it really depends on like wherever you are in your healing journey. I think it's
True.
hard to like just do it in one like sentence. But I think early on, it's really important to stop looking for outside answers. Like,
Yeah.
have this space, have this period where you stop going and see doctors or like doing
Mm,
treatments and therapies and really cultivate this belief that you're the only one who can get yourself out of it. You
yeah.
might not be responsible for ending up um, in this situation. That's not what I'm saying, but
Mm,
you can only do the work, you can only do the healing. And I mean, there has to be this time where you truly accept where you are and like, and I don't mean like accept that you're chronically ill for the rest of like your
yeah.
life. I mean like meet you yourself where you are and
Yeah.
accept where you are and let go of like this resistance and all of these expectations, but really in a compassionate way, like guide you through this own journey without relying on like doctors and treatments, etc. But um, yeah, just kind of do the work yourself. I think is my
Yeah.
biggest piece of advice, even though it's triggering for some people and it's challenging for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that I realized quite late on, or maybe I realized it like early on, but there was so much resistance. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Like a part of you knows, but it only really kind of becomes you only truly accept it when you're willing to, you know.
yeah, I feel
Um,
like I just had to suffer like for a
that's
very long time to
that's the thing, yeah.
come to the terms that I need to. I'm kind of like standing in my own way, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. I completely agree with it. It's not saying like exactly how you said it that it's somebody's fault for getting here, but it's incredibly empowering to come to the space. That's what I like to share with people. And I know it's often triggering and maybe it needs to be, but it's like it's really around empowerment that you are the only one that can really get yourself out of this. Who cares what actually got you here? And it's like you said, we have to go through these. The victim stuff needs to play out. Like all of these things need to play out until we realize that's not what's going to get us out. It's like we can play the victim as long as we want, but that's going to keep us stuck. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think really owning it, like, okay, cool. Like take this this is what I love about like guys like Joe Dispenza and all these like inspirational healing stories is it's like use that to realize that you can do the same basically. But like you said, we have to almost go through our own or not almost, we definitely have to go through our own process of suffering before we're really willing to let go of the part of us that just wants to say, no, I can't, you know.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, just give yourself grace.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Elena. I think this has been awesome, and I think people are going to get a lot out of it. So thank you for sharing your story and yeah, coming on
Yeah,
here.
thanks for having me. And like I said in the beginning, I love your channel. I still use it to this day and like all the meditations on Spotify and it's been such a big piece and like really challenged me at times and was pretty thought-provoking. And I think that's also what I really admire about your channel is like you're being very direct, very honest. And sometimes it hurts a little bit in the beginning, but
Yeah,
it's you kind of need it,
yeah.
need to hear it in such a clear way. So yeah, I'm really grateful for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always nice to get the feedback that it's useful and helpful. So I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
awesome. Cool.